The night before my wedding, I wasn't stolen. I wasn't bought with money. I was bought with a truth I had never been brave enough to face. That love doesn't always come dressed as forever. Sometimes it comes as a mistake that feels like destiny. The wedding everyone celebrated was built on silence, not because there was shouting or pain, but because there was an absence of truth. From the outside, it looked perfect. Smiles were practiced, plans were precise, and every detail was arranged to reflect stability and success. I was praised for choosing well, for finding someone dependable, someone kind, someone who fit seamlessly into the future others imagined for me. Yet beneath the surface of that approval, my voice slowly faded. I learned how to nod instead of speak, how to agree instead of feel, how to smile while parts of me quietly disappeared. Love, I was told, was supposed to be calm. It was supposed to be easy. So when my heart grew quiet, I assumed that was maturity. I convinced myself that longing was childish and passion unreliable. I traded curiosity for routine, excitement for predictability, and called it commitment. Each day I became better at playing the role of a woman in love, even as I struggled to recognize the woman staring back at me in the mirror. There were moments when the silence grew heavy. Late at night, lying beside someone who loved me in a way that felt careful and controlled, I would wonder why my thoughts felt louder than my emotions. Conversations became practical rather than intimate. We discussed schedules, responsibilities, and expectations, but rarely dreams. I learned his habits and he learned mine, yet neither of us truly learned the fears we hid behind politeness. The connection was respectful, but it lacked fire. It didn't challenge me. It didn't awaken me. It simply existed. I began shrinking myself to maintain peace. I softened opinions, buried doubts, and dismissed instincts that whispered something was missing. When uncertainty surfaced, I reminded myself of how much effort had already been invested, how many people believed in this union, how foolish it would be to question something so secure. Silence became my shield, protecting everyone else from discomfort while slowly suffocating my own truth. By the time the wedding approached, the silence had become normal. I mistook numbness for stability and routine for love. The future ahead looked clear, mapped out, and socially approved, yet my heart felt like it was standing still, waiting for something unnamed, something uninvited, something honest. The offer came quietly, not with arrogance, not with cruelty, but with a calm confidence that felt heavier than any threat. He didn't announce his wealth. It was already present in the way the room seemed to belong to him, in the stillness that followed his words. One night, he said. Just one. No promises. No future demanded. No past questioned. It sounded simple, almost harmless, yet it carried the weight of something forbidden. I remember how my heart reacted before my mind could catch up, how my chest tightened as if it recognized him before I ever did. The night before my wedding was supposed to be sacred, reserved for nerves, dreams, and the quiet anticipation of a life already decided. Instead, it became the moment where choice stood directly in front of me, unmasked and unafraid. I wanted to be angry, to call him reckless, immoral, heartless, but none of those words fit. There was no hunger in his eyes, no sense of ownership. What unsettled me most was his honesty. He didn't disguise the truth with romance or excuses. He admitted he wanted the night not to possess me, but to know me, to exist beside me in a space untouched by vows and expectations. He spoke as if time itself had paused just for this question, as if the world would not move forward until I answered. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than his voice, could feel the invisible line he had drawn between who I was and who I might become. Every reason to refuse crowded my thoughts. My wedding dress waiting in silence. A future already promised. A life built on plans and approval. Yet beneath all of it, something stirred that had nothing to do with money or rebellion. It was the way he looked at me, as if I were not a prize, not a risk, but a choice he was willing to lose. He offered no guarantees, no escape, no fairy tale ending. Only presence, only truth, only a single night where I would not belong to anyone's expectations, not even my own. I realized then that the danger wasn't his wealth or his boldness. The danger was how seen I felt in that moment, how deeply he understood the fear I carried about walking into a life chosen more by comfort than by desire. The offer hovered between us, fragile and powerful, asking me not what I owed the world, but what I owed myself. The night unfolded without urgency, without desperation, as if it understood the gravity of what it carried. We didn't touch at first. We talked, slowly, carefully, as though every word needed permission to exist. There was no music playing, yet the silence between us felt alive, charged with meaning. He asked about my childhood, not the polished version I shared at gatherings, but the small memories I had buried, what made me feel safe, what made me feel invisible, what I wished someone had noticed sooner. I surprised myself with how easily the answers came, as if I had been waiting for someone who wouldn't interrupt or judge them. As the hours passed, the conversation peeled away layers I didn't know I was wearing. I spoke about love the way I had learned to survive it, cautiously, with rules and boundaries designed to prevent disappointment. He listened without trying to fix me, without turning my vulnerabilities into weaknesses. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet loneliness of a man surrounded by everything except connection. Success had taught him how to win, but not how to belong. In that shared honesty, something fragile formed between us, something that felt more intimate than touch. The city outside the window blurred into distant lights, as if the world had decided to leave us alone. Time softened. The pressure of the coming morning faded, replaced by the rare comfort of being fully present. When he finally reached for my hand, it wasn't possessive. It was careful, almost hesitant, as though he feared breaking the truth we had built with words. That single gesture sent a tremor through me, not because it crossed a line, but because it confirmed what my heart had already begun to accept. I realized then that awakening doesn't always arrive as passion. Sometimes it arrives as clarity. I saw myself clearly for the first time in years, not as a daughter, not as a fiancée, not as a future wife, but as a woman with unmet longings and unspoken fears. The night didn't change who I was, it revealed who I had been silencing. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet rebellion against the life that waited obediently for me to step into it. When dawn approached, there was no regret in the room, only awareness. I knew that whatever happened next, I would never be able to return to the comfort of not knowing. The night had given me a mirror I could no longer avoid, reflecting a truth that demanded courage rather than compromise. By morning, love and security stood on opposite sides of my heart, each demanding loyalty, each asking me to define what mattered more. Security was familiar. It wore the face of approval, tradition, and certainty. It promised a life where nothing would collapse. Unexpectedly, where love was steady, predictable, and socially celebrated. Security meant staying on the path already paved for me, stepping into a role everyone recognized, and honoring commitments made with good intentions, even if they were made in quiet ignorance of my own needs. Love, on the other hand, was terrifying. It had no guarantees and no clear future. It did not come with a schedule or a list of expectations. It asked for honesty instead of obedience and courage instead of comfort. Choosing love meant risking disappointment, judgment, and loss. It meant admitting that the life I was about to enter might keep me safe, but would never set me free. Love didn't promise permanence, it promised truth, and truth was far more dangerous than stability. I thought about the man waiting at the altar, about his kindness and his certainty. He loved me in a way that made sense, in a way that could be explained and defended. He offered a partnership built on reliability, not intensity. There was no cruelty in that love, no betrayal, only a quiet absence of depth I had learned to ignore. Walking away from him felt like a betrayal of effort, of time, of expectations carefully built by families and futures intertwined. Then I thought about the man who offered me nothing but presence. No vows, no security, no assurances beyond the honesty of the moment we shared. What unsettled me was not the possibility of loving him, but the realization that with him, I would never be able to lie to myself again. Love, in its raw form, stripped away excuses. It refused to let me hide behind obligation or fear. It demanded I take responsibility for my own happiness, even if the cost was uncertainty. The weight of the decision pressed against my chest. One choice led to a life that looked complete from the outside but felt unfinished within me. The other led to a life undefined, fragile, and unpredictable, yet undeniably alive. I understood then that the true conflict was not between two men, but between who I had been taught to be and who I was finally brave enough to acknowledge. The morning light crept in slowly, indifferent to the storm that had passed through me. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. The world continued as if no decision had been made, as if the weight in my chest was imagined. I stood alone with my thoughts, listening to the quiet after a night that had rearranged every belief I held about love and certainty. There was no dramatic goodbye, no promises whispered in desperation. What lingered instead was awareness, heavy and unavoidable, sitting beside me like a truth that refused to be ignored. I looked at the dress one last time, its white fabric untouched, waiting patiently for a future that now felt borrowed. It represented safety, approval, and a version of happiness that required no explanation. But as I reached for it, my hands hesitated. I knew I could wear it and walk forward, and the world would applaud my strength, my maturity, my sense of responsibility. No one would question my choice. No one would see the quiet surrender it required. The hardest sacrifices, I realized, are the ones no one notices. Walking away didn't feel like courage at first. It felt like loss. It felt like tearing myself away from a life I had rehearsed for years. I imagined the confusion, the disappointment, the questions I would never fully answer. I imagined the man I was meant to marry standing alone, blindsided by a truth I had discovered too late. Guilt wrapped itself around my resolve, reminding me that honesty can wound just as deeply as betrayal. Yet beneath the guilt, something steadier emerged, something that felt like self-respect. The future ahead was undefined. There were no vows, no timelines, no assurances waiting for me, only the knowledge that I had chosen to stop betraying myself. Love did not guarantee happiness, but it offered authenticity. Security had promised comfort, but at the cost of my voice. In choosing uncertainty, I chose to reclaim the parts of myself I had silenced to survive expectation. As I stepped into the morning, the fear didn't disappear. It walked beside me, reminding me of everything I stood to lose. But so did something else, quieter and stronger, the understanding that a life lived honestly, even if imperfect, holds more meaning than a life lived correctly for the sake of others.